Okay. Well, once more, thank you, everybody. Just to give a quick overview of what we're going to talk about here, I'm going to talk a bit about PDC Describe, our application, as well as an ancillary application, PDC Discovery. And I'm going to start out with why we're doing this. So in our current state at the library, we have this application, we call it Data Space. It is a 5x customized instance of DSpace. We initially inherited it from our central IT. So it was customized by people who have never worked with our group. We've kept it alive over the years, and it is currently the home for research data submissions, among other things, but it's in legacy state. So we're looking to get out of the system that we're currently in. It's pretty limited. We utilize ARC identifiers as the stable unique identifiers, and we utilize Dublin Core and some custom metadata schemata in this system, neither of which is really appropriate for research data in particular. So what we are looking at migrating to is something that would be part of a suite of services called Princeton Data Commons, hence PDC, which you're going to hear a lot of. Princeton Data Commons is an initiative that is mostly spearheaded through the Princeton Research Data Service, or PRDS, and supported by PULIT in particular. And it's a project that's intended to create an ecosystem of tools and services that support the research data lifecycle for Princeton-affiliated research communities and research data surrounding ingestion, publication, citation, even preservation, and beyond. I'm going to be brave and try to go out of my slides here to show you the, this is what we have right now as the discovery layer, Princeton Data Commons Discovery. Anyone who's ever seen a Blacklight instance could recognize this. The data that you are seeing right here, right now, is being pulled from Data Space, utilizing the DSpace API. So what you can see that we have right now, this is us mapping directly from Dublin Core into, it's sort of a one-to-one for PDC Discovery. Now, going back to what we're hoping to get to moving forward, this is where we're currently at. We've got everything in all our eggs in one basket in Data Space. Data Space handles everything from researchers submitting their data and describing it, uploading the files, so ingestion, ARC minting, so getting a stable unique identifier, which is the thing that most researchers need and care about for publishing their research, as well as publication, discovery, even data storage. It's all kind of bundled up in one space. So our ideal feature state is what we're aiming for on the right here, where we have PDC Describe as a separate application that we're working on for the ingestion and description and file orchestration of files submitted by researchers and reviewed by curators, as well as minting stable unique identifiers in the form of DOIs. I'll cover a little more about that in a moment. Utilizing cloud storage and using PDC Discovery for publication and discovery of data. So in other words, the ingestion process can happen on its own pace and be pushed into discovery when the time is appropriate. So in PDC Describe, some of the features I just want to cover. This is an open source application. There's the code base. Anyone wants to go look at it. It's just pure Ruby on Rails. We're utilizing AWS S3 as the storage backing. We are also separately utilizing Globus, the tool and suite of tools, the service for file management and orchestration. So we have Globus endpoints, which are essentially file transfer protocols that are put over various pieces of storage that people can use to transfer files from point A to point B. For instance, we've got Globus endpoints over a couple of S3 buckets that are used for the curation process right now. We're in active development and approaching MVP rapidly. Some of the nice features that we're going to get with this new product that we're working on are, as I mentioned, stable unique identifiers in the form of DOIs. One of the drawbacks of Data Space is you only get your identifier at the end of the process. So you have to go through all of the different file description work as the researcher and wait for someone to approve your work before you can get the identifier to even work with. And as we know, researchers often deal in preprints or just have publishers or other requirements where they need their identifier before they're really ready to put something fully all the way through the process in the repository. So we've got to work around for that. Well, not really workarounds, this is just more how DOIs function, which I'll get to in just a second. We're also using DataCite for the descriptive metadata profile in the new system. So in addition to moving the content from Data Space into this new system, this is not just going to be a fully automated migration. This is more of a redescription process where we are taking the metadata that's been put into the Dublin Core profile over the years and mapping it appropriately into DataCite, and also enhancing it where we can. For instance, we're also building in better support for ORCID IDs for researchers, so that when we have creators in the system, they can store their ORCIDs alongside their names and be affiliated with their research that way. There's a transparent review process. One of the drawbacks with DataSpace is it's kind of hard to tell once you submit something where your item is in the process, or if you're a curator waiting for something, you don't always know where it is, and that can hold people up, which again, when time is a factor, it's a problem. More flexible methods for file transfer, since we're relying on Globus as well as S3. There are a number of tooling options for, in the case of researchers, we would want them to use Globus. In the case of developers, we have S3 tooling at our disposal for things like large-scale data migrations. And then we're also introducing authority control, such as ROR for organizations, into some of these metadata fields. So with that, I'm going to be brave again and go back into my browser. I'll just go right to the system itself. This is me logged in. This is my dashboard. First, I'm just going to walk through what the submission process looks like at a high level. Then I'm going to show a couple of fully fleshed out examples. And then that'll be basically the meat of the demo. So then be happy to take any questions if there are any. So basically, at the very beginning of the process, we try to make it very simple and require very little for you to get started. We need a title, we need a creator, and then we have some required metadata that moves forward. So I'll go ahead and create something. I can add myself as a creator. I can then also add other creators. And if I have an ORCID ID for a user who's already in the system, their metadata will get supplied. I can go ahead and then start the actual process. This is called the ingestion wizard. I'll go ahead and put my description in. These are the only metadata fields we absolutely require. We would like you to add more, but if this is all you can add for the moment, this is enough to get yourself started. Title, description, rights, creators. And this is what I was referring to with an DOI. This is a reserved DOI or a pre-signed DOI. It is not set to active in the it's not set to active. That's basically the only thing that's different about it. But I could take however long I want as a researcher to totally complete this submission. I could have a lot of back and forth with the curator. I could take all the time I need. And once this submission is completed, this will still be my DOI. So in other words, it's in your interest to start your research submission process in this system, because you will already get a stable, unique identifier that is minted by and controlled by Princeton University. As a submitter, you can also enhance things with some additional info. So, add some keywords. We've got some lovely tooltips here. This is an example of the use of ROR for some funding reference. So that's the ROR URL for the Max Planck. Let's put some award info for the award I definitely got. And then you can add things like, a related object identifier, and identify what it is and what it has to do with your research. You can add more, you can change the order, add more contributors, and you can identify their role. Organizational contributors, same thing. Domains and communities, which are additional ways to group the object. We're working on a third tier of these for the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, which has a sort of additional hierarchy that's unique to that organization. And then likewise, because I'm an admin in the system, I get the curator controlled area, which these are metadata fields that we only want curators who are working with researchers to be able to control, such as defining what version of the data this is, or the publication year. If it's coming from our old system, it's going to have an ARC with it, and it's going to be important that those ARCs continue to resolve. So we want to make sure that those are explicitly mentioned. And then some of this stuff, such as collection tags, is metadata that we're managing and bringing over from DataSpace, but we don't want to lose it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And in the upload process for the researcher, we have an explicit step that says upload a README file. So I'm going to go ahead and grab something. And if you don't know what to add for your README, we have a helpful template here. And we've also got a guide that the Princeton Research Data Service has put together for what's a README, why should you create it. And this is because we're basically making a README a requirement as part of the creation and review process for for an object and its publication. A research data set has to have a README, even if it's relatively bare bones or you need a lot of help getting it going, it needs to be there. Then you can attach files. If they're under a certain size, you can upload them directly. We also have research data clusters that are located through research computing and OIT, central IT, that you might be able to go to. And essentially this, or it's big and it's somewhere else, go to the same thing, which is, you know, okay, tell us how to get to it. And then a curator would assist. So I could say like, it's on hard drive on my desk. You don't want that to be the case, but if it is, we can help you. And then we've got your license granting language, and then you can optionally leave a message for the curator. It's like, you know, I need to publish, please, something like that. And then you hit grant license and complete. Messages go out to the curators for that particular pipeline of research data via email, as well as in the system. So you can see this little notification here because I'm a curator in that pipeline. And I've been tagged here. You can see it was created and it's ready for review. And here's my message that, you know, I need this ASAP, please. So we can assign a curator. And if a curator gets assigned, they get a notification that they have been assigned to this. I'm also a curator. I'll just assign myself. And then I think this should work. We can hit approve data set and then boom, it's approved. And then once it's approved, the DOI is set to active. And that data would then be expressed in too many tabs, would be expressed in PDC Discovery. So to give you an example, here's something that we have in PDC Describe right now that is an object that we're migrating. You can see some of the back and forth between our curator, Hallie, and in this case, one of the folks on my team, Bess, was helping work with this. The metadata is here, it's been approved, and it's been pulled over into our staging instance of PDC Discovery. So essentially, once something's approved, it can go into that discovery pipeline and be made available. The only other things I wanted to call some attention to are just some other examples of the benefits of the messaging queue. So here is another example of an item that we're working on, migrating from our data space instance. You can see some back and forth between Chung Lee, who's our curator for PPPL, going back and forth with Bess with some of the feedback on the metadata. All of these folks are in the system and in the new system PDC Describe and have their ORCID identifiers associated with them. So if you go click on them, you can, you know, it links right out to them. And something that's a farther down the road goal we have is to make it that it's a little easier to put stuff in this system and get it updated in ORCID. But we have that option now. And then you can see here the change history for objects. It's sort of like a version control history almost, where you add things in green, you remove things in red. And one other example I have of that here is an item that I made in advance of this demo. I simulated some back and forth between a researcher and a curator. So for instance, some of the feedback of add keywords and domain, you could scroll down to the history, you could see that I've done that. I've added a domain, I added keywords, I removed one, then I added a funder, then I made some changes to the funder. So all of this is essentially, this change history is recorded as part of the provenance log and it's preserved alongside the object. And the only other thing I wanted to call attention to is, you'll see here this Princeton Data Commons data site and metadata files. These are our first steps toward preservation for these objects. We're able to implement a preservation plan with this new system. And one of the first steps we're doing there is when an object is approved, we are able to export the data site metadata in XML format, and then the rest of all of the metadata associated with the object in the application database as metadata JSON. We put it in the sidecar subdirectory of the file, and we're backing that up into S3 as well. This as a way to hopefully be able to just keep the metadata agnostic from the system if we ever need it. So our last steps toward our MVP, we are focusing on shoring up our storage. We're finding some interesting challenges right now as a team that we're uncovering for performance and file orchestration and validating on both sides of the migration. In addition to that, we're building out our preservation strategy now that we're in a good place to do so. And we're finalizing our migration for the metadata mapping and then the actual migration using a really solid set of specs that we've been working with stakeholders to make sure look right, knowing that it's not a one-to-one. So in other words, it's going to look different, but does it look correct? And are we bringing all the information over that we need to? From there, what is also interesting about this project is we're not going to need to wait until everything is migrated from the old system to begin using the new system for new information, because we're going to start directing people to the new discovery interface for all information. And so in other words, a migration often has to be faster because you need to move to the new system. We are in a position where we can kind of do it at a pace that makes sense for everybody. That was a lot of information, a lot of me talking. Does anyone have any immediate questions?
Thanks a lot, Kate. Looks like Robin has a question.
Hi, thanks, Kate. I was wondering, when you were talking about the README and you referenced the templates, would that inform people about data management plans?
Yeah, please. Yeah, it can. Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because there are a number of requirements for data management plans, I think, depending on where your research is coming from. At the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, there's a whole working group dedicated to their specific DMP. So I think for them, there'd be boilerplate language referencing it, whereas the README is at least the first step so that people are aware you need to be considering this. And any other questions?
Yeah, any other questions? David?
Sure. First of all, this is super exciting, and I think we're all probably digging through stuff like this. So thanks for the presentation. This is wonderful stuff. So going into you're doing a lot of work, obviously, in AWS for storage. Have you started investigating the kind of out-of-the-box tooling for things like checksums and things like that, or are you all still wiring those up yourself? I know that they've just released. We wired up some other stuff before, and then, like, whatever, 2 months ago, they released the ability to just generate checksums on the fly on upload to S3, right? Like, and be able to verify that, check them and all that stuff. Are you all experimenting with that, since this is such a green project?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that. Yeah, so we are utilizing the MD5s that you get for free, just as a handshake to make sure things look okay for migration processes. But we have been looking specifically into the features you're touching on for S3, and excuse me, knowing that, we're experimenting with turning on, I think it's a Lambda you turn on now, that for all new files that get uploaded, you can generate and record whatever, like 4 different sorts of checksums, and hold on to them as a way to validate files. And they have a nice Python-based tool that they've made available that lets you sort of go and check it. If you have a local copy of it, go check the one on the cloud on the fly. Yeah, and the only thing that we were thinking about was, we probably want to try this out now and see what this buys us, because if we don't try it now and we upload a bunch of new stuff and we don't have this turned on, you got to move everything and then move everything back. And then, so it's like, we want to try now. Now, obviously, running the Lambda would not be a zero cost thing. So that's the other thing we want to be mindful of, is what's the cost versus what are we actually getting out of it. But yeah, it seems worthwhile to investigate. So we've been doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, in our experience with Lambda, that's like the cheapest thing that we run. Like, it's so much cheaper than running normal boxes. Well, anyway, I'm super excited about it. I love updates and stuff, and maybe even a digital preservation panel at Samvera Connect. I know those are coming up. If you want to talk about it, I'd love to talk to you about it.
Absolutely.
All right, any other questions?
Kate, this was an amazing demo. It was really cool and very informative, and I loved you giving it. It was like being right there in the deep part of it. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm happy to answer any questions at any time if you think of anything later on. I think y'all have my email address, and I'm also reachable on the Samvera Slack.
Great, thanks so much. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording as we move on to the rest of the agenda.